So we are advancing in Shabbos. So after last week's discussion about Zorea and Mevashel, this week we are dealing with Maleches Dash. I think in English, Dash would be threshing. And as usual, I always prefer, and in cooperation with Rabbi Gottesman. Rabbi Gottesman is a dear friend, but in many ways, I consider him a Talmud, and though that is the way he sees himself. And when he goes through the Minchas Osher, and he discusses with me which simonim and which sugyas to discuss, he's really booky in these sugyas. So the sugya today is not only about Maleches Dash as one out of the 39, but today, as almost every week, we will have Yesaidas Gedolim, fundamental Yesaidas and principles in Maleches Shabbos. Even though we are focused on one of the Lametes Maleches, but today's shiur is not only about Maleches Disha, but one of the big Yesaidas in Maleches Shabbos. So one of the Lametes Maleches is Disha, translated into English, threshing. And it is one of the malachas in Seder HaPas. Maybe at some stage, maybe even today, I will address the question, why were Chazal Mesada Lametes malachas in Zdorim? 11 malachas Seder HaPas. From stage number 1, HaChodesh VaZoreah, Ad Ho'oifa. There are 11 malachas along the way. And then we have Maleches HaOyer, hide. From Mafshet till Kosev in Moichek. Is it just a matter of convenience to make it easier to memorize those Lametes malachas, or does it go beyond that? Seder HaPas, Seder HaOyer. But anyway, Dash is threshing. In days of yore, this malacha was performed by animals. So the stalks of grain, after they were cut off the fields, were thrown together, and then we took animals, usually oxen, to trample on those stalks of grain. And the stalks break open, and the kernels are released. And that is the malacha that comes before Zoira, Boirer, Meraked. After threshing, it was winnowing. When we picked up with pitchforks, the terois threw it into the wind, and the wind blew the lighter elements away, which is the psilus, and the grain fell down by gravitation, and that is the very first stage of Breirers Psilus Mitoichoichel. So today we will be dealing with the question, what is the Hagdorah of Maleches Dash? Ayin Gimel Omid Beis Mesechet Shabbos, and I know that you went through the sugya. I'm the Shoda Pisal Dikla V'Ater Tamra. So a person wants to take the dates off the palm tree. Well, there are two ways to take the dates off the tree. You could climb the tree. But if you know what a palm tree is, well, you probably saw many of them. They're more common in Los Angeles than they are in New York or in the Caribbean. Sometimes palm trees grow very tall, very high, and they don't have branches. So it's quite dangerous trying to climb coconut trees or palm trees. Monkeys do it very well. Human beings have more difficulty. So the other way is just throw rocks up to the tree and dislodge the dates. And that is what the Gemara deals with. Ayin Gimel Amid Beis. Ha'im the Shoda Pisa Ledikla V'Ater Tamra Chayev Mishim Shnayim Mishim Toilesh. Toilesh is Koitzer. And the other malacha is Dash. And we have three different interpretations in the Rishonim. What actually is the Disha? Rashi writes, Mefarek ilan memasoi. Well, Prika v'te'ina is a big sugya in Choshe Mishpat. But l'cha'ora mefarik, which is told at the dash, is not the same as prika v'te'ina. Prika v'te'ina is taking the burden off the back of an animal, an oxen, a donkey, a camel, or other animals that usually carry masois. So Rashi seems to understand that mefarik, which is a tolda de dash, is similar to prika v'te'ina, which is a pele. Because disha, l'cha'ira, the definition is breaking open the kisui, the cover, and revealing or taking out the kernels of grain that are within. That is the objective and the goal of disha. Rashi says, "Mefariku ilan memaisai." It is as if the tree carries a burden, and the tree is like the animal, like the donkey, and the dates on the tree are like the masa, the burden on the back of the animal, and that is why it's mefarik. But that is a gewaldige chiddush. Tosfos disagrees with what Tosfos brings in the name of Rashi, and Tosfos' interpretation is when you throw those stones or rocks or whatever is up to the tree and they hit the date, they break open the cover of the date, the klippa, the shell, and that is mefarik, which is a tolda de dash. That is mamish, similar to disha. The difference is only in the methodology. Disha is done with animals trampling with their hooves on the stalks of grain. This time it's not an animal. It's a man throwing a rock, but the objective and the result are the same. Breaking open the shell and revealing, taking out the date. That's Tosfos. Rashi on the spot is slightly different than what Tosfos quotes from Rashi. So Rashi writes, Mefarek tolada shel dash, shemefarek tvua mishiboleo, loshen poirek menachamor, ve'avze mefarek tmorim min hamichbedois. It is not lefarek ilin memasoi, but rather dislodging or separating the individual dates from the cluster, from the eshkoil. That's what Rashi writes on the spot. And when Tosfos quotes Rashi, it is reasonable to try to reconcile what Tosfos brings from Rashi and what from Rashi himself writes on the spot. So even though Tosfos quotes Rashi, Mefarek ilan mimasoi menaperes she'olav, maybe what Tosfos really means is what Rashi writes. So the cluster is part of the tree. But essentially, the disha, the mefarik, is not relating to the dates on the tree, but to the dates and the michbedois. The michbedois atmorim are like eshkoilos anovim. So dates grow in clusters, just like grapes do. There is an eshkol that has dozens of grapes. There's a cluster that has dozens of dates. So Tosfos is very clear, and Tosfos is very reasonable. It's mamish similar to threshing. The rock hits the shell breaks open, and the date comes out. In Rashi, we have two different formulations, signoinos. Tosfos writes, mefarik ilan memaisoi, which l'chayra would mean it's taking the fruit of the tree. And Rashi writes the dimyan to prika v'te'ina, poirek min hachamor. But maybe Tosfos means similar to Rashi. It's not relating to the date on the tree, but rather to the date and the cluster. Va'adayin tzorech iyun. So what we find in Rashi on the spot is also the Ritva, also the Ran. Adayin tzorech iyun. How does that resemble Disha? How does it resemble Disha? L'cha'oira, the Hagdor of Meleches Disha is Gilui. It's breaking open the cover and taking out what is concealed. So like the kernels of grain grow in stalks, the kernels of wheat, of chita or sa'ira, any of chameshes minadogan, they grow in stalks of grain. When you break open the shibolim and you take out gar'ine hachita, so according to Tosfos, it's the same with the dates. But according to Rashi, whether it's the Rashi quoted in Tosfos or the Lashon of Rashi, we have tzorech iyun. And therefore, my argument is the Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos is in the very essence of this malacha. Hagdoras Maleches Dash. How do we define Maleches Disha? According to Tosfos, as I mentioned before, Gilui, Prikas Hashibolim, Lotzi et Achito, you break open the cover, the shell of the dates, to reveal and take out the dates. According to Rashi, it's not Gilui, but separation. And Dash essentially is similar to Zoyra, Boirer, Meraked. The difference, the way I see it between Dash and Boirer is Boirer is Breires Oichel Mitaroivis Shel Psoiles. Dash is Piruk Oichel Mechibur Shel Psoiles. It's not breaking open the cover and taking out what is concealed or covered, separating Oichel from Psoiles when Oichel is mechubar to Psoiles. Zoyra, Boirer, Meraked are three stages of separation. But the common denominator between Zoyra, Boirer, Meraked is taroivis. They are not mechuber, they're not attached. They're just mixed together. Disha is the same. In essence, it's a malach of separation, not of gilui. But it is breaking the attachment. It is setting loose oichel metoch psoiles hamichuberes laoichel. That is the essence of Disha. But Disha, in a way, belongs to the group of Zoyra, Boirer, and Meraked. The Gemara says Zoyra, Boirer, and Meraked is essentially the same malacha. So why is it counted in three different malachas? Because that is the way it was in Mishkan. In a way, we would say, according to Rashi, Disha, Zoyra, Boirer, Meraked, Achaseim. Why are they counted as four? Because that is the way it was in the Mishkan. So why does the Gemara say Zoyra, Boirer, Meraked, according to Rashi? That's not really a kasha, because after all, Disha stands apart. It is similar, but not the same. Zoyra, Boirer, Meraked have more in common. They're all about separating a taroivis. Disha is also about separation, but it is separating oichel mepsoiles mimukoim chibura. It is separating oichel from its natural attachment to psoiles, because as grain grows, it grows in shibolim, stalks of grain. So it is separating the oichel from the psoiles. and breaking up the chibur. But essentially, it belongs to the same group. Dash, Zaira, Boirer, Merake are all about separating Breris, Oichel, Mitoch, Psoilis. How is Disha different than Zaira, Boirer, Merake? Zaira, Boirer, Merake refers to Taroivis. Disha refers to Chibur. But in essence, the result is the same. The goal is the same. Chidushe Haran, the fine Gemara in our sugya, clearly writes, Dash Zaira Boirer Echodheim. And that proves our point. And that is the way I understand Rashi. In other clear sources, Rabbeinu Chananel, Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph. So I'm holding a very small Gemara in my hand. And at my age, I have difficulty reading tiny little letters, even with my glasses. But I will try. Hadash hu hamefarek apsoiles hamechuberes ba'oichol umechinoson lebreire. So it is clear in Rabbeinu Chananel. How does he define dash? Mefarek psoiles mechuberes la'oichol. Not gilui ha'oichol metoich kisui ha'psoiles. It's not uncovering. It's not taking out what was covered, revealing what was covered. No, Rabbeinu Chananel clearly says, Hadoshu ha'mefarek ha'psoiles ha'mechuberes ba'oichol. And then in the continuation, he defines boirer, and he writes boirer is breires, boirer noitel psoiles mebein hu oichel umashlicha o noitel hu oichel mitoicha psoiles. So Rabbeinu Chananel makes it clear. Boirer and dash is about separation. The difference is, this is teruvois, and that is chibu. So we have Rabbeinu Chananel, we have the Ran, Toisis Yevomes, Kuf Yudalad Umid Beis, Dash, Boirer Oichel Metoich Psoiles. And that is source number 3. So besides explaining our Rashi, we have 3 different sources which seem to prove the same definition and the same Agdora, the same concept. So we have a Machloikes Rashi and Tosfos, what the definition of Maleches Adash is. Is it Gilui or is it Breira? Rashi, the only way to understand Rashi, Mefarek Tmora Metoy Chamich Bedois. So this cluster has oichel and psoilis. The dates are oichel. The twigs and the leaves are psoilis. The same with an eshkol anovim. And when you break apart the dates from the cluster, that is mefarek shu tolada shel dash. And that is why I think it's more reasonable to explain Rashi the way Rashi writes and not the way Tosfos quotes Rashi. It's separating the dates from the eshkol, from the cluster, and not from the tree. Because taking the dates off the tree would be more similar to koitzer, which is cutting the grain, the stalks of grain, from the karka. So, Tmorem and Amich Bedois, as we find in Rashi, Ritva and Ran, quoting Rashi, which is slightly different than the way Tosfos explains Rashi. Yesod number 2, Beit Daf Yud Gimel Omed Beis, it seems to be clear in the Gemara that there's no problem peeling fruits or vegetables. We peel oranges, grapefruits, tangerines, why wouldn't that be mefarik, which is a talda de dash? Why would there be a difference between citrus fruits or various different nuts that have a peel or a shell, which is not edible? And when we break open the shell, whether it's almonds, peanuts, other nuts, I don't know what the name of every type of nut is, whether it's walnuts, almonds, peanuts, most of the nuts, the shell isn't edible. Is that permissible on Shabbos? Or even peanut oranges, or tangerines, or grapefruit, or other citrus fruits? Why wouldn't that be mefarik, which is a talda de dash? Disha is breaking the stalks and taking out the grain. Why would that be different than peeling fruits? So when we're dealing with apples or pears, in which the peel is edible, and many people prefer eating those fruits with the peels, then obviously that would not be a talda de dash, because it's oichel and oichel, it's not oichel and psoilis. But when we're dealing with nuts and many different types of fruits in which the peel is not edible, would that be a problem of disha or mefarik, which is a talda de dash? Beitz Yud Gimel Amud Beis, it seems to be clear in the Gemara that's not a problem, and that's a Magen Avraham Shin Yud Tes Sif Koten Ches. And the Magen Avraham quotes the Ramah at the end of Siman Shin Chof Aleph. I think it's Sif Yud Tes. The Ramah writes one could peel onions or garlic, and that would not be a question of Malacha and Shabbos. Rabbi Kiva Eger, on the spot in Siman Shin Yud Tes, says it's an Issa Gomer. And he quotes Rashi in our sugi, the fine dalad umedalef, legabe koitesh chito mikli poso. So Rabbi Kiva Eger understands Rashi. After you do disha and you break open the stalks of grain and the actual kernels of grain are revealed, koitesh is stage number 2. And Ayin Dalad Umedalef, the Gemara says, koitesh is also a talda of dash, like mefarik, and it is pounding and crushing kernels of grain to take off the peel, because grain have peel. And that's the concept of whole wheat grain. So when you have white flour, you remove the grain from its peels, but most of the nourishment is in the peel, so that is whole wheat grain. So Rashi says it would be a malacha koitesh chito. And the Bialocha at the end of Shin Chof Aleph writes very harshly about Rabbi Kiva Eger, and he writes that he thinks that Talmud Toya wrote this ha'ora because he doesn't understand Rabbi Kiva Eger. Koitesh is with a kli, and the Magen Avraham deals about biyad. So in many melachas we find the difference between kli and yad. Boirer would only be a malacha d'oraisa. Boirer b'kli, boirer b'yad would not be defined as a d'oraisa. So Rabbi Kiva Eger says he doesn't understand. The Mishnah Berurah says in Bialocha, the end of Shin Chof Aleph, he doesn't understand the kasha of Rabbi Kiva Eger. Koitesh is a malacha b'kli. The Magen Avraham deals peeling wheat biyad. But Rabbi Kiva Eger is Rabbi Kiva Eger. And the same kasha we find in Pri Megadim. Magen Novis, Rab Mordechai Benet, one of the great Sforim on Malachas Shabbos is Magen Novis from Rab Mordechai Benet. I told you many times in the past, I'm an Einikal of Rab Mordechai Benet. And they asked the same kasha. And I think Rabbi Kiva Eger is right and not the Mishnah Berurah, because there is a difference between Yad and Kli. But the sources Rabbi Kiva Eger deals with, the Ramah at the end of Shin Chof Aleph, the Gemara and Beitz, seem clearly to indicate that peeling fruit should not be associated with disha at all. Doesn't have the essence of disha, not because it's biyad v'lo b'kli. You could peel fruit with a kli. We peel apples and oranges with a clay, with a knife. So I think Rabbi Akiva is right. There must be an essential difference, a yesodistic difference between peeling shumin v'bitzolim, onions and garlic, or nuts, or citrus fruits, and mefarek shu tolda the dash. Not only because this is biyad and that's bekli. So what is the difference? Reb Mordechai Bennett has a very dakistic difference, which I could understand, I could explain, but not really agree with. So Reb Mordechai Bennett says there's a difference between dash and peeling fruit. When we peel fruit, we are removing the shell, the peels from the fruit. Meleches disha is a malacha we don't do in the cover, in the peel, in the shell, but rather in the fruit itself. Disha is hoitzoas oichel min apsoilus. Peeling is asoras apsoilus min oichel. It's a nice hagdora. Is it convincing? Lania's deity not really convincing enough. By disha, by threshing, actually the malacha is done in the stalks, in the psoilus, not in the oichel. We do not directly take the kernels out of their cover. We just crush the cover, and that is the way the kernels of grain are freed from what was covering them. So I do not see a tangible difference between breaking open nuts and threshing wheat. I might see somewhat of a more convincing argument peeling fruit where it might be different, but using a nutcracker, breaking open nuts, or threshing wheat, I think they're the same. V'yim kain adayin tzorech iyu. Shulchan Aruch Harav, very well known, Shin Yud Tes Sif Tes writes that many nuts have two different coverings. In modern language, in English, we would define the one as a shell and the other as a peel. They're not the same. Usually the peels are stuck to the fruit, stuck to the nut, attached. Shells are usually, the fruit is loose within the shell. So a nutshell would be more resembling stalks of grain, which are somewhat, the grain is somewhat loose within the stalk, not like peels. So according to Shulchan Aruch Harav, disha is only relevant by shells and not by peels. And that is why Shulchan Aruch Harav writes that some nuts have two levels of covering. In the outer one, there's a malach of dash, not in the inner one. Using modern language and definitions, dash would only apply to a shell and not to a peel. Very interesting. So Lubavitcher Hasidim don't eat peanuts, don't break open peanuts on Shabbos, because peanuts have a shell and they have the reddish peel, which is mechubar, stuck onto the actual peanut, which is the yellow one. So yellow, red, yellow. The same, some other type of nuts. So according to Shulchan Aruch Harav, you could eat those nuts that only have a shell, but they don't have peels, which are removed. So many people prefer peanuts with a peel. I'm not that hot about peanuts, but when I do eat peanuts, I usually eat them with a peel, the red one. But Shulchan Aruch Harav writes, you can't break open peanuts on Shabbos. Minhag ha'olam is la'akel. So let me share with you my Haggadah. And I'm a Negeya B'Davar, and I always apologize. when I share with you my chidushim and my understanding, I'm going to give it away. I never say kablu dati. But I really think it's teras emes. How do we define malachas disha? Bein le Rashi, bein le Tosfos, whether it's gilui or breira, whether it's revealing or separating, adayin tzorech iyun. Haiman de porum silke chayev mishum toichein. Porum silke chayev mishum toichein. What is toichen in English? The word just escaped me. Grinding. I think it's grinding. So the Gemara says when you cut vegetables, if you cut them to very small pieces, that's a chashash of toichen. So when you make a salad on Shabbos, as you all know, you don't cut very small pieces. You see to it that the pieces are somewhat bigger than they would be in the middle of the week. There's a beautiful story about the Divrei Chaim. The Minigan sounds is that the Rebbe makes his tzibelis, his ayam mitzvibel at the tish, unlike all the other dishes, which are brought in fitting for consumption. And the Rebbe just eats whatever he eats, and all the rest go shirayim to the Hasidim. So Moiri Verabi, the Divrei Yatzev, and I think all the Rebbes, Eniklach of the Divrei Chaim, the Babever, and all the others do the same. To the tish, they bring in an egg or a few eggs, oil, piece of onion, and the Rebbe himself cuts the egg, cuts the onion, mixes them together, pours on the shemen and the salt. Why is that? So the Divrei Chaim, as I explained many times, was a great Rebbe, but he also was the Poisek Adar. I think in the Talmud, in the history of Chassidus, the Divrei Chaim stood apart. He was unique. Many Rebbeim were Gedolei Yisrael. That is very well known, many of them. Just to note a few of them, Chidush Harim, the Avnei Nezer, the Sachet Shabbat Rebbe, many others. But the Divrei Chaim was not only known as a Godel B'Yisrael, he was the Poisek Adar, comparable to the Shoyle Meishav Reb Shlomo Kluger. Every major issue, major controversy that the halachic world had to deal with came to the table of the Divrei Chaim, just like the Shoyle Meishav Reb Shlomo Kluger in his time, in his day and age. And many Gedolim came to the Divrei Chaim, even though they weren't really Hasidim. And one of them was Rabbi Yitzchak Aaron Ittinger, who was the Rav of Lemberg, who was a nephew of the Shoyle Meishav. Shalos Teshuvas Mario Alevi. So as the story is told, I never heard the story from my Rebbe, from the Tzanzer. But the Babavi used to tell the story. And it's in the family. So once the Yitzchak Aaron Ittinger was at the tish of the Divrei Chaim on Shabbos, he came for Shabbos. And an Amoretz sitting at the tish asked the Divrei Chaim, why does the Rebbe make the Emetz Zwiebel himself? Why can't the Rebbetzin do it? The Divrei Chaim said, I like it when it's fresh, so I prefer doing it at the tish, right before I eat it. Strange. That's what the Divrei Chaim said. The Yitzchak Aaron Ittinger told the story. I was once again in Sanz, and a big lamdan asked the Divrei Chaim, why does the Rebbe do this himself? The Divrei Chaim said there are so many halachic issues, so many halachic questions regarding making Eimitzvil, Teuchen, Lash. So just to be on the safe side, I prefer doing it on my own. And then Rabbi Yitzchak Aaron Ittinger said, third occasion, Chosin asked the Divrei Chaim, why does he do it himself? And the Divrei Chaim explained, my Chol Shabbos always add up to a gematria of 7, Keneged Shiva Yemei Shabbato. Marak, 4, 2, and 1, B'mispakot is 7. What else? Dag, 4 and 3, 7. Basar, 2 and 2, and 3, 7. Dag, basar, marak. All Machal Shabbos are 7. However, Botzel is 13, and that is onions. 2 and 9 is 11. 3 is 14. So when you cut the onion, half of 14 is 7. And that's the remez of Shabbos. So the Rebbe needs to do that himself. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nettinger said, well, obviously the Divrei Chaim had many other reasons to do it himself. And he answered to everyone according to his Havon and his level. So the Chassid got his answer, the Lamdan got his answer, the Amoritz got his answer. And obviously, the Divrei Chaim had many other explanations at his disposal. So this is a Sheina Maisa. So when he went Haim on the Purim Silka, Chayev Mishim Toichein, the Rambam, Perek Chof Aleph Halacha Yud Ches, when the Rambam brings this halacha, Haim on the Purim Silka al Menas Levash Loi. Why does the Rambam write? He's cutting vegetables to prepare them for cooking. Usually when you cut vegetables, you prepare them, you make a salad. So yes, we do cook vegetables. All of us cook vegetables. Our wives, we eat a vegetable soup. But the Rambam clearly writes, Haiman de Purim Silka Almanas Levashel Chayev Mishum Toichein. Ma'amer is one of the Lamates Malachas. After Koitzer, before Disha, there's the Malacha of Ma'amer. And Ma'amer is bringing food together. When food is dispersed on the soda, on the field, just bringing it all together in heaps. That's Malachas Imur. The Rambam and all that other Rishonim explain, Ein Imur elo mamokim giduloi. So if your bowl turned over and apples or nuts fell onto the floor, picking them up is not a malacha. Ma'amer is only basoda memokim giduloi. What I want to prove from Ma'amer and from Toichein is there are essentially two different sets of malachas. In Lashon Kodesh, and ultimately the language of Torah is Lashon Kodesh, I try to give a decent shiur in English. I prefer Lashon Kodesh, and even when I give a shiur in English, I resort to Lashon Kodesh because that is the language of Torah ultimately. Yesh malachot rishoniyot. There are some malachas that only apply to the early stage of preparing food for storage. Other malachas apply to preparing food for consumption. And they're two different sets in essence. When we learn Hilchas Yom Tov, there's a concept of Malachas Oichal Nefesh. Many Rishonim say, Malachas Oichal Nefesh is Melisha ve'elach. From Lisha, which is netting dough, is that correct? No, I think netting is aricha. What's Lisha? Yeah, I think maybe it would be netting dough. Am I correct? How does one define Lisha?
He says yes, kneading. It's called kneading, yes.
Okay. So Melisha ve'elach is Malachas Oichal Nefesh, excluding early malachas, which are not associated with preparing your meal, but preparing the basic ingredients for storage. So anything up to Lisha is not Malachas Oichal Nefesh. The Ramban writes, those are Malachas Avodah, Kol malachas avoida lo tasu steht bei Yom Tov. Bei Shabbat steht kol malacha lo yeosa. By Yom Tov, the Torah says Malachas Avodah. Malachas Avodah are the early malachas, which are performed in the field, not in the home. The malachas that are usually performed when you take the raw materials for storage, preparing them for storage, not in your kitchen. Those are not malachas Avodah, those are malachas Oichal Nefesh. And the same principle applies to Shabbos as well, not only to Yom Tov. Ma'amer comes right after koitzer. So you cut the stalks of grain, mi'al gabi karka. You pluck fruits from the trees. And then you make heaps. That is defined as Chazal as mimareach. That is miruach. In Ilchas Tunas Amaisis, that's the shlav of Gemar Malacha. Ma'amer applies only to the earlier stages. When your apples fell onto the floor, even in your backyard, that's not ma'amer. Your apples are fitting for consumption. Ma'amer is only preparing food for storage. The same regarding Threshing. And that is why the Rambam writes, Porim Silka Levashel. But when you cut vegetables in your home, that is no longer Threshing. We're a machmir shelo kedivrei Rambam. I'm just explaining the Rambam because I want to explain the concept. Some halachas don't apply to what we do in the kitchen before we consume food. They only apply to industry, to agriculture, agricultural works in the fields. And those are the earlier malachas of Seder HaPas. Some malachas apply to everything. For instance, boirer. Boirer has different stages. Zoira is usually done in the field. Winnowing. Boirer would apply to any stage, from A to Z, from beginning to end. Not ma'amer. Threshing is a machlokes that Rambam and other Rishonim, as I just explained. So what I'm striving at is dash. Disha is only the earlier stages. Preparing foodstuffs for storage, not preparing your meal. That is the Agdor of Dash. And that is why the Av Malacha is threshing. After Koitzer and Ma'amer comes Disha. Disha is done out in the fields. We bring together the stalks of grain and have animals step on them, trample on them for an hour, for 2 hours, until all the stalks are broken apart, destroyed, and the kernels could be picked up, could be collected. So Mefarik, which is a told of the Dash, only applies to the shells that are usually broken open and discarded before storage. And that is what Rashi and Tosfos deal with Tmorim. So dates have two different shells. One is a shell we're not familiar with. It is a shell, not a peel. We never see that shell because it is broken open and the dates come out at a very early stage before storage. And that is why we only know the peel. We don't know the shell. That is the way I understand Meleches Disha. So it doesn't really depend on the difference between a shell and a peel, like the Shulchan Aruch Harav says. Could be either a shell or a peel. The relevant factor is when is that shell or peel removed? Samoch la'achile or samach le'ichsun? Is it done out in the field, preparing the foodstuff for storage? That's dash, that's mefarik, but not at the stage in which you are preparing food for consumption. And that is why peanuts, some like to buy peeled peanuts. I think in recent years, most of people do that. 30, 40, 50 years ago when I was young, most of people bought peanuts with their shells. And that is the way we bought peanuts, cheaper. Today, we are living in an age of plenty. Even the have-nots have far more than the haves had 50 years ago. When I was young, we used to buy bags of peanuts with their shells, not with their peels. Today, most of you buy peanuts without the shell, without the peel, just the yellow peanuts from the bag into your mouth. So what I argue is, whether it's walnuts, peanuts, I don't remember in English, they're hard nuts, the little brown hard nuts. Whatever you usually peel, or nutcrackers, which are not industrial. You use them in your house. That's not disha. That's not mefarik. That is what makes the difference. That is the way I understand dash. But we still have a problem with the Bekivegas kasha from koitesh. Koitesh is when you crush the grain. So once again, that is for storage. Most people don't crush grain in their homes. We buy wheat. We buy soilus. So that is an early melacha. But how about koitesh in your home? Is that permissible? One of the big yesodis that I wrote in Minchas Osher, and I do not recall whether I discussed this with you or not. You will remember better than me because I could no longer remember what I say where and when after giving so many shiurim. I do not remember whether I discussed with you the dual concept of Toldas Malachas Shabbos. That a Tolda is not always similar to the essence of the Av. Sometimes it's doima lemalachas Av. To the malacha and not to the essence. So I think koitesh is a Tolda of dash because we are crushing. Just like the animals trampling on stalks of grain, apply pressure, and they're crushing those stalks. Koitesh is a told to the dash mitzada maisa, velo mitzada toitzoa. When you peel fruit, it is not in any way similar to maisa hamalocha shel disha. You're peeling, you're not crushing. Koitesh is a told to the dash mitzada maisa. So even though it's not similar to dash in the essence of disha, which is in the early stage, and sometimes koitesh is in a later stage, but it might be a told of dash mitzada maisa, and that is why you could peel fruits, but you can't crush wheat to remove the psilus, to remove the peels. So in today's shiur, we have two big chidushim regarding dash. The new Agdor on dash to explain Rashi, Rabbeinu Chananel, Toises Yinevamis. The dish is not gilui, but rather like breira. Zoyre boire maraket is breiris psoilis menataruvois. Dash is piruk psoilis mena oichel michiburoi. But it's about separation and not gilui. That is Shittas Rashi, contrary to Persha Tosfos. And the second yesod to explain why is it permissible to peel fruits or crack open nuts or peanuts? Why wouldn't that be a tolda of disha? We explained disha, like some other malachas, is only in the earliest stages when we prepare food for storage. And regarding malachas Yom Tov, according to some opinions, that is the difference between malachas avoida, which is also in Yom Tov, and malachas oichel nefesh, which is mutar in Yom Tov. So these are the two choshev yesodis we discussed today.
Yes, Rav. In the context of learning Mlechas Disha this week, we will be visiting the question of baby wipes. The Rav has a tshuva on baby wipes. Could I be matriach you to tell me where exactly it's printed, in which, I assume it's printed in Charles Tshuva's Minchas Asher?
Yes, Minchas Asher Chelik Aleph and Minchas Asher Chelik Beis. You'll just apologize. I'm apologizing. I just need to turn around, take this form out. I apologize many times. I don't remember the Simonim in Minchas Asher because it's not Gerchos of the Yankas. So one moment. Not more effort than that. So Tshuvas Minchas Asher Chelik Aleph, Siman Yud Aled Tezvav Ted Zayin, and Yud Zayin, 4 Simonim. Yud Aled Yud Zayin, Sharas Tshuvas Chelik Aleph, and it was such a big chiddush that I got so many letters. I revisited this question in Minchas Asher Chelik Beis, and that would be, just one moment, Siman Lamed Gimel, Minchas Asher, Shalas Tshuvas Chelik Beis. So we have 5 tshuvas in Minchas Asher, but the most important one is the first Siman, Chelik Aleph Siman Yud Aleph.